Bible study done simple. Here on this channel, we'll be doing a topical Bible study, verse by verse, cataloged and in order. This project is going to take years, but we will eventually have an auditory and visual version of a study Bible that we can use as a reference, as well as be used as a tool for learners who may not be inclined to reading as much. I work with youth, and one of the most common things I hear is, well, what if I don't like reading? I do better with videos. I'm thinking of one young man in particular who uh, always has great questions, but never wants to seem to sit down and read and study the Bible to answer them. He would just rather come talk to us, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think that there's a big gap in available resources, maybe that are perhaps too difficult to find, or perhaps not even necessarily having been done before. I don't know. If there is, and if people want to point me to that, that would be great. Um, but I aim to make as few doctrinal hardline statements as I can. Rather, I'd like to provide a very non-denominational reading of what is in the text, what its context is, any background information that's needed to properly understand the text, as well as possibly some commentaries from various denominations. If you have any relevant additional information about a passage in a video or whatever, please reach out, comment, email, so that way I can continue to build this library. I will do my best to have any sources or other relevant information in the description, but I am neither a robot nor a scholar, so I'm quite sure there will be mistakes. But having said that, today I'm going to be going over love. Now, on the left here, you're going to see Logos Bible Software. It's a really great informational app. I love using it. You can get a lot of information from it. I've found that it's a much more thorough search engine than even Blue Letter Bible. So, prime example here, if you look over to the left, you'll see where it says he loved her in Genesis 24:67. Took Rebecca and she became his wife and he loved her. Well, that loved, if you were to look on, say, Blue Letter Bible, which is a great tool too. I love it. I like the commentaries in there. I think they're very useful. But Blue Letter Bible would not pick up Genesis 24:67 because Blue Letter Bible is only going to search for love. It won't get loved. It won't get loves, etc., etc. It only picks up love. Logos, on the other hand, does pick up pretty much any iteration of the word love. And so, as we're looking through, now, if you see up at the top here, we're going to be going through, in total, 745 uses in 652 verses. For today, however, we're going to start. See, if you tap all passages, you can go to various different sections. Today, we're going to at least start through Genesis through Deuteronomy. I don't know how far we'll get, but I'm going to start through and we'll go from there. But in Genesis through Deuteronomy, what we have are 60 results in 55 verses. Now, of those 60 results, what we actually have are a couple of different contexts. First one is love of a parent. Pardon my terrible handwriting, but the love of a parent to a child, out of those 60, that occurs 7 times. Now, the next one is the love of God. Now, I'm just listing these out in the order that they appear through this search. So, you can put them in any order you want. It doesn't really matter. But the love of God occurs 23 times. Now, what's really interesting about this is specifically there's one word that is used a lot. Whoops, not God. Steadfast love, specifically coming from God. So you'll see over here on the left, Genesis 24:12, and you go down and you can see, here we go, Genesis 32:10, deeds of steadfast love. We have Genesis 39:21, showed him steadfast love. Exodus 15:13, you have led in your steadfast love. This actually occurs 15 out of the 23 times. And we'll get into that as well as we go through the verses. But I never noticed it before, but that's what I love about doing this study actually is certain things just start to jump out at you. And I kept going through and I'm counting, and as I'm counting and counting and counting, I kept seeing steadfast love, steadfast love, steadfast love. And I think it's really something quite to be said that it's not until Deuteronomy do we see Deuteronomy 4:37 that he loved your fathers and chose their offspring after them, where it doesn't have steadfast love. So actually, all the way from Genesis to what, Numbers, it's always steadfast love, which I just thought was actually just really interesting. And we'll get more into that. But next, after the love of God, is going to be love of others. So that's, say, the love of a slave for his master, or to love one another. So that's love of others. Again, my handwriting is awful, but that is 5 of these instances. Now, one where logos or logos, I think it's logos, I'm not sure, where it does pick up something interesting is logos actually picks up the one instance of lovely, um, which occurs once. So that's all we need to know about that. It's just describing the tense of Jacob, I believe. I'll double check it whenever we get to the verse, but it's not really love per se. Um, then we have man's love for God, and that occurs 13 times. And finally, we have, oops, not finally, but we do have love of a spouse, and that is 8, or kinda, I feel kind of weird calling one love. So I would like to mark it as 7.5, but it is 8 times. And then finally, we have love of preference, which is actually just food. Specifically, it's just talking about like a meal that is loved, and that occurs 3 times, and they're all right back to back to back. Um, but that is all of the instances that we have of love from Genesis through Deuteronomy. So if you're keeping score at home, the 23 times that the word love is used between Genesis and Deuteronomy is actually the love God has for man, and 15 of those are a very specific word: steadfast love. I also find it really interesting that we are told or involve the love of us to the Lord only 13 times, um, to where it seems like really a lot of focus between these two is actually not so much on the focus of the love that we have for God, well, the love we have for God, but the love God has for us. And I don't know. I think it's really powerful that almost half of all of the words love in the Old Testament, from Genesis to Deuteronomy, are about God's love for us. I'm not a numerologist. I'm not going to start putting in numbers and counting dates and adding a Jewish calendar or anything silly like that. I'm trying not to be doctrinal, but I don't think that stuff's very applicable. If you do, that's on you. If you want to take those numbers and run with them, feel free. But that's not going to be something that I'm going to be doing. Um, so instead, what we're just going to do now is focus more on Logos, and we're going to go right to the first one. See, I love that. That's so handy. So the verse here is Genesis 22:2. So nope. So this is the sacrifice of Isaac. I don't know if you guys know, if you're perhaps here and you don't know the story. Abraham is asked to sacrifice his only son Isaac upon an altar. Um, and the one thing I noticed here is that he said, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. Um, and it's just, something that really struck me when reading through this is, God really doubles down on the whole situation, where it's not just take your son and offer him. It's take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah. Um, Another interesting thing is that I don't know how this verse plays in with Ishmael, right? Where obviously Ishmael was born first. So that was the son that Abraham had um, with Sarah's handmaiden or handmaiden Hagar. And I'd like to look into the only son part. So we'll just go ahead and do that together. So what we're going to do is we're going to tap verse 2, hold and select, and then we should be able to, where is it? I think we have to go like that. We go like that. Hmm, hang on. How do I do this? I'm working with an Apple Pencil now, and it's not being very accommodating. Yeah, here we go. So double tap it, and then we're going to hit Passage Guide. So it's going to take us to a new window. And so we have a couple of options here. I like Matthew Henry's concise commentary a lot. Um, but the first one that we're going to go to is, I believe it's the Faith Life Study Bible. Yeah, Faith Life Study Bible. So it says here, your only child, since Isaac is not Abraham's only son, he had Ishmael by Hagar earlier in chapter 16, verses 11 through 16. The Hebrew text here is referring to value, not number. So Isaac is Abraham's special son. I think that's an interesting choice, but I'm not going to take that as the only option. So we're going to go here as well. And this is, I forget who JRB stands for, or JFB. It's take now thy son. Every circumstance mentioned was calculated to give a deeper stab to the parental bosom, to lose his only son. Um, yeah, see, so that was the point I was getting at, the double down thing. But he doesn't really comment on Ishmael. So let's see what Matthew Henry has to say. Okay. My son, thine only son by Sarah. Okay, so um, again, he's saying we're never secure from trials. Every trial is indeed a temptation. Not to draw him to sin as Satan tempts. Strong faith is often exercised with strong trials and put upon hard services. The command to offer up his son is given in such language as makes the trial more grievous. Every word here is a sword. Observe. 1. Ooh, the person to be offered. Oh boy. There. Sorry. The person to be offered, take thy son, not thy bulls and thy lambs. How willingly would Abraham have parted with them all to redeem Isaac? Thy son, not thy servant, thine only son by Sarah. So Henry here is making the point that it's only Sarah, meaning that it's the only promised son, I would take that as. So somewhere between the faith life, where it's not in number but in importance, and in Matthew Henry's, that it's the only promised son. I think we can find that only son word there. This is where I would probably lean that it's an only promised son. But that's just me. That's just my interpretation. Make of that what you will. But that's pretty much how this whole section is going to go. Is we're just going to go through each one. And so now we're in Genesis 24:12. And now this is in context of Isaac and Rebekah. Basically, Isaac needs a wife, and so Abraham sends a man. A servant took 10 of his master's camels and departed, taking all sorts of choice gifts from his master. And he arose and went to Mesopotamia and the city of Nahor. And he made the camels kneel down outside the city by the well of water at the time of the evening, the time when women go out to draw water. And he said, O Lord, God of my master Abraham, please grant me success today and show steadfast love to my master Abraham. Now, this steadfast love is actually, it's one word in the Hebrew. I'm not going to try and pronounce it. Um, I'm not even going to really try and write it, but take my uneducated knowledge, hesed. Now, I don't know if that's pronouncing it right. I don't know anything about it. What I do know is that this word is, I guess you could say conjugated almost a little bit differently, but it's more or less this exact word, which is not just steadfast love, but if you go over to here and we go select steadfast love, and we do a lookup, open in Bible word study. That's going to take us to another window. And man, it loves windows. So it's going to load this up and go figure. Okay, so it didn't open that up, but that's all right. I'll get it to go. So steadfast love, search. Okay, show steadfast love to my master. Boy, it really doesn't want to cooperate right now. It was just doing it earlier. Uh, Steadfast love, look up. Hmm. It's like the internet isn't connected. Oh, that's wild. Well, anyway, it's Hesed. The word is Hesed. It is basically steadfast love. It's also faithfulness, fullness, and it's basically a like two people making wow making a covenant. So it's kind of an agreement, a unity, and I just thought that that was really interesting. That in all of these passages, um, I'll get back to my original search. Yeah, so that in all of these passages, over half are, three quarters are using this word steadfast love. So we're going to see that a lot. It's going to basically, like I said, up until Deuteronomy. And even then, in Deuteronomy, it's usually um, less of a noun and more of a, what would that be, up the past tense adverb. I'm not an English person, but, he loved you, um, God's love. Whereas when he's showing steadfast love, it's always steadfast love. It's very interesting. So we have 12 in, we have 14. Both of those are going to apply to the same situation. That's the servant with the camels and basically meeting Rebecca. 24-27 is a continuation, still in the same story. So we could read the full story. And so we see here where we were before. Behold, I am standing in the spring of water, and the daughters of the men of the city are coming out to draw water. Let the young woman to whom I shall say, please let down your jar that I may drink, and who shall say, drink, and I will water your camels. Let her be the one whom you have appointed for your servant Isaac. By this I shall know that you have shown steadfast love to my master. There's the second one. Before he had finished speaking, behold, Rebekah, who was born to Bethuel, the son of Milcah, the wife of Nahor, Abraham's brother, came out with her water jar on her shoulder. The young woman was very attractive in appearance, a maiden whom no man had known. She went down to the spring and filled her jar and came up. Then the servant ran to meet her and said, please give me a little water to drink from your jar. She said, drink, my lord. And she quickly let down her jar upon her hand and gave him a drink. When she had finished giving him a drink, she said, I will draw water for your camels also, so that they have finished drinking, until they have finished drinking. So she quickly emptied her jar into the trough and ran again to the well to draw water, and she drew for all his camels. Um, I'm not going to quote this, but what I will say is I believe it's John Bevere. John Bevere did a sermon on Rebecca, and in it, he talks about how many gallons of water that she would have had to bring up to fill all the camels. I'm just spitballing, don't quote me on this, but I believe it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 gallons per camel. So it would have been approximately 300 gallons of water that she would have gone down to the well and come up and gone down and come up and gone down and come up and gone down and come up uh, to have to give all of his camels water. It would have been uh, probably, you know, at least an hour, 2 hours. It would have been quite a task to go get that much water in a jug that you carried by hand. No pumps back then. She was just dragging it out of a hole in the ground, and I think that's pretty wild. So the man gazed at her in silence to learn whether the Lord had prospered in his journey or not. Um, I think gazed at her in silence to learn whether the Lord had prospered in his journey or not. That's something else that's going to stick out to me. So I'm just going to keep that. Where are we? I believe we're at Genesis 24, 21. So I will be looking at that later myself. So when the camels had finished drinking, the man took a gold ring weighing half a shekel and two bracelets for her arms weighing 10 gold shekels and said, "Please tell me whose daughter you are. Is there room in your father's house for us to spend the night?" She said to him, "I am the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Milcah, whom she bore to Nahor." She added, "We have plenty of both straw and fodder and the room to spend the night." Man bowed his head and worshipped the Lord and said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not forsaken his steadfast love." Remember, covenant or commitment, who has not forsaken his steadfast love and his faithfulness toward my master. As for me, the Lord has led me in the way to the house of my master's kinsman. So again, it really plays on this steadfast love. Now we're going to keep going. Open up the tabs. All right. We're going to go a little further down into Genesis 24:49. And so what we have here is the servant, not the slave, the servant coming back and explaining the whole story and basically retelling all of this to Laban and Bethuel, right? So her parents. Now, we don't really have to get into that a whole lot more. That pretty much takes care of that whole story. So you're going to see here. So we have 24 through 49. Then we have 67. And this is upon Rebekah's return. Now Isaac had returned from Beer Lahai Roy and was dwelling in the Negeb. And Isaac went out to meditate in the field toward evening, and he lifted up his eyes and saw, and behold, there were camels coming. And Rebekah lifted up her eyes, and when she saw Isaac, she dismounted from the camel and said to the servant, "Who is that man walking in the field to meet us?" The servant said, "It is my master." So she took her veil and covered herself. And the servant told Isaac all the things that he had done. And then Isaac brought her into the tent of Sarah his mother and took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. So this is the first love of a spouse that we have mentioned. So up until now, they never used the word love. I don't know what that means. I'm not going to read into any other relationship before Isaac, but this is in fact the first place in the Bible where we have a mention of one spouse loving another. So that's just something to note. Now we go to chapter 25, 28. And so we have two sons, right? Isaac has two sons. Now, of these two sons, here we go. we have Esau, and we have Jacob. Now, here in 28, we have Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. So we have a little bit of a tension between these two, and Esau was a daddy's boy, and Jacob was a mama's boy. But that rift is going to continue to grow, as we'll see. But as of right now, this, just like Abraham and Isaac, is the same use of that love where it's a parent for a child. And so we're not going to get into the story of Jacob and Esau. But what we will say is when we jump to 27, this is where we have the love of preference, those three. So the love of preference, there's three instances, and they're 1, 2, and 3. And it's basically just talking about, oops, nope, not this one, this one. So Genesis 27:4, 27:9, and 27:14, all three of those are just talking about food, and the preference of Isaac to, loving a certain type of food, basically the game that Esau would hunt. So those we can slide right by pretty quick. Then when we get to 29, we have the story of Jacob and Rachel. Now it's also a spouse. It's a spousal love. So Jacob loves Rachel, and he says, "I will serve you 7 years." Ooh, 7 years for Rachel. Now, when he served 7 years, he also served 7 years for Leah. And we can jump to the verses. So, here we go. Now, where do we start? There's a good place to start. So, let's go here. Laban said to him, "Surely you are my bone and my flesh." And he stayed with him a month. And Laban said to Jacob, "Because you are my kinsman, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what shall your wages be?" Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. But Rachel was beautiful in form and appearance. Leah's eyes were weak. I really wonder what that means. So we are in, where are we at? 29. So we're going to add Genesis 29, 17, just because I want to look into that verse. It's just a strange way to say it. But Jacob loved Rachel, and he said, "I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter Rachel." Laban said, "It is better that I give her to you than I should give her to any other man. Stay with me." So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days because of the love he had for her. Then Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife that I may go into her, for my time is completed." So Laban gathered together all the people of the place and made a feast. But in the evening he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and he went into her. Laban gave his female servant Zilpah to his daughter Leah to be her servant. And in the morning, behold, it was Leah. And Jacob said to Laban, "What is this you have done to me? Did I not serve with you for Rachel? Why then have you deceived me?" Laban said, "It is not so done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. Complete the week of this one, and we will give you the other also in return for serving me another 7 years." Jacob did so and completed her week. Then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife. Laban gave his female servant Bilhah to his daughter Rachel to be her servant, so Jacob went into Rachel also, and he loved Rachel more than Leah and served Laban for another 7 years. So interestingly, he served 7 years the first time, basically married Leah, and then a week later married Rachel, and then finished his 7 years. So it was only 7 years and a week until he married Rachel, but he did serve a total of 14 years. So he must have really loved Rachel, because that's half of a, what's the word I'm looking for? It's the word for a job. If it's not a job, it's a, I don't know, career. That's the word I'm looking for. So he basically served half of his career for Rachel, which is interesting, but not that interesting. So we continue on. Leah conceived and bore a son. He loved Rachel more than Leah. And so he calls us, Leah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Reuben, for she said, because the Lord has looked upon my affliction, for now my husband will love me. So there's that same kind of continued Jacob and Esau thing, right? Where, you know, I don't know if this plays too much into it. This is just me talking. But, when we have that Jacob and Esau competition, right, where they're back and forth and back and forth, um, I think it's really interesting that then Jacob carries that down into his own family. Um, and I think that says a lot about, love of a parent, and how that love, the way that you love your children, can affect how they grow up. Because that same sort of constantly vying for attention, and it's all right to love one more than the other. Um, Jacob then carries on to Leah and Rebecca, not Rebecca, Rachel. Um, so that's definitely something that would be a more, I'm not going to say a doctrinal hardline, but that's really starting to get into kind of a committed stance on things. I don't necessarily want to give opinions a whole lot, um, but that is just something that really jumps out at me while we're going through this, that there's that continued um, talk of love, and kind of a weird mirror parallel between Jacob and his father, right? And then Jacob's sons. So we'll get into that, but it really, it really plays out that kind of continued problem where it just follows down the line and never really gets solved, and no one's really ever better about it. They just keep making the same mistakes. So, with all that being said, we're kind of out of the uh, you loved my wife more, one wife more than the other, loved one son more than the other, and we're going to start getting into more of the steadfast loves. So I think we'll get through Genesis on this video, and then we'll wrap this up, and I'll start from Exodus next time. But Genesis 32:10. Let's go ahead and take a look. So Genesis 32. Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. And when Jacob saw them, he said, "This is God's camp." So he called that the name of that place Mahanaim. Mahanaim? Mahanaim. Something like that. And Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau his brother in the land of Seir, the country of Edom, instructing them, "Thus you shall say to my lord Esau, Thus says your servant Jacob, I have sojourned with Laban and stayed until now. I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, male servants and female servants. I have sent to tell my lord, in order that I may find favor in your sight." And the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, We came to your brother Esau, and he is coming to meet you, and there are 400 men with him. And Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. He divided the people who were with him, and the flocks and the herds and the camels into two camps, thinking, if Esau comes to the one camp and attacks it, then the camp that is left will escape. So again, that tension, love feud that they had, that one more than the other, you can really see how this just constantly affects every aspect of Jacob's life. I really didn't expect for this to be such a big deal. Growing up, you hear the stories in Sunday school and you kind of know the general gist of the Old Testament. But it wasn't until I did this study on love where I really started to see just how often and how far spreading those consequences are of some really quite simple. You read these verses, you take a look at, say, over here, we go and look and say Genesis 25:28. It's a real small verse, right? Um, but funnily enough, it has this really big impact, right? Where it just kind of controls the rest of the story for what, almost 20 chapters, where Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. It's a very simple verse, very straightforward. Um, and it's not one, I don't think I've ever heard anybody preach on it. Um, I'm sure somebody has, but it's what, 14 years later plus. So 14 years plus later, we have Jacob still saying, still being affected by this tension that they have. It's actually kind of wild how just a simple little verse really uh, describes a much larger, more insidious problem. Um, and it's, I think, in a large part, you could say, forms the entire story of the Israelites. With Joseph, we'll get to that, but that constant show of love of one more than the other, and that's kind of Israel's story as a whole is having loved one more than the other, and that just really affects the whole history of a nation. And I think that's now we're starting to really get into speculation, but think about that and think about how you could extrapolate that further out. And I don't know, you could probably find some sermons on it. I'm sure people have talked about that. But make of that conclusion what you will. Just know that it was a tiny little verse um, that Isaac loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob, and it really took off from there. So anyway, here where we were, the camp that is left will escape. And Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham, and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, return to your country and to your kindred, that I may do you good. I am not worthy of the least of all the deeds of steadfast love and all the faithfulness that you have shown to your servant. For with only my staff I have crossed this Jordan, and now I have become two camps. Please deliver me from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, that he may come and attack me, the mothers with the children. But you said, I will surely do you good, and make your offspring as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. Um, so I think that's also really interesting that he's reminding God of his steadfast love. He's really banking on this, saying you promised, you promised, you promised. But also, he made two camps. So, he goes through all this inner turmoil and saying, I trust you, you're the God of my fathers and my forefathers, but also, just in case, I'm going to make two camps. And, I think that really speaks to how we understand the love of God versus the love of man, in that, even man has a hard time comprehending and truly standing on steadfast love. That level of commitment is so foreign to people that even when we know and know and know and know and know about the steadfast love of God, we still find ourselves making two camps, in our lives, even where we say, well, I know that the Lord has promised me. I know that, whether it's in your church or it's in your work or your home life or whatever. But we kind of still hold on to these two camps. We make these two camps in our lives. Um, and it really just stems out of a lack of understanding what steadfast love and commitment is. And then you take that idea of not really understanding commitment, and we pair that back to, ooh, that's not what I wanted. We pair that back to all of the relationship issues and the love and the loving one more than the other, especially in Jacob's case, where we're talking about, he has two wives, and he has love for one more than he has love for the other. And yet, right, both of them, they're two commitments, two covenants. But with Leah, right, he doesn't value this covenant. It talks about how much he doesn't really respect or love her, right? And so she knows that. She knows that she's not loved. And yet Rachel, he does love. But the thing is they're both the same covenant. And so, just the fact that, as people, we have this capacity to make covenants we don't really mean, you know, um, I think it's kind of hard for us to understand the importance or the relevance of what, a commitment from God is, a two-party commitment from God of his steadfast love. And it's always his steadfast love. So the whole story, the entire time, every instance of love from God so far has been steadfast love. That it's this faithfulness, this commitment, this never breaking, never changing, never failing love of God. And throughout this whole story, again, I never really noticed just how intrinsic the concept of love is to this whole story. The concept of love in the story of Israel's making is really just so profoundly woven together, and seeing both, the positives and the negatives, the good example of God, and the just continuously flawed example of love from Israel and their forefathers. Really just it's just such a sharp contrast. It's actually it's really wild. I'm personally, I'm really glad to have gone through this, because this is, there's more work that needs to be done here. So I'll probably come back to this at another date and really go through love and give a more firm stance on it. But for now, I think this is pretty comparable. It's probably going to be the best I'm going to be able to do. Uh, it's a pretty big list that I have ahead of me. Um, so we were at the last sections of Genesis. Now, Genesis 34:3. This was that kind of half count that I was talking about earlier of love for a spouse, because this is the story of Dinah. Now, Dinah was the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob. She went out to see the women of the land. And when Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, the prince of the land, saw her, he seized her and lay with her and humiliated her. and his soul was drawn to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob. He loved the young woman and spoke tenderly to her. So Shechem spoke to his father Hamor, saying, "Get me this girl for my wife." Um, Now, I am absolutely not qualified to talk about abusive relationships and that kind of weird, complicated love, um, because that's a whole issue. It's definitely not in my wheelhouse, and I wouldn't dare to speak on it. But what I will say is, I'm counting this as a half because I just personally cannot bring myself to call this real love. I won't do it. I think it's offensive. And ultimately, it ends with Shechem and Hamor and all of them all basically saying, they come to Jacob. He goes to marry her, and he says, "Well, you have to get circumcised." And so when the army and every man in the city gets circumcised, um, specifically, no, wait, I don't want to get this wrong, but I think uh, it's Simeon, yeah, Simeon and Levi. So, funnily enough, the priests and the house of Simeon all come together, Simeon and Levi, and they come in and they kill every man in the camp. So, so there were definitely consequences. I didn't spell that right, but whatever. But we're just going to leave that at that because, like I said, I am not qualified to give that conversation. I am quite sure you can find other information on it on your own. So if you would like to, please feel free. You're going to look up Dina, and I'm sure you can find a sermon, a teaching, probably quite a few on that particular instance of quote unquote love. Now, we only have a couple of left here in Genesis, so we're going to head back and we jump to Genesis 37. Now, Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojournings in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. So all of these together, you're going to see all the sons, but the important part is Israel loved Joseph more than any of his sons. So once again, he not only does it with his wives, but with his children. And to him, it seems probably fairly normal. This is the life he grew up in. So he grew up in what I'm going to call an uneven home, and he continued on to lead an uneven home. And so I didn't talk about this yet, but the whole reason why I decided to start with love is because, we're given the fruit of the Spirit, right? And the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, etc., etc., etc. But it starts with love. And so I thought, okay, well, let's start there. I would like to move forward in my understanding of the fruit of the Spirit. I want to grow personally as a Christian. I'm really in this spot in my life where I really feel compelled to just really dive deep into my faith and then let Christ transform me as a human being. I want to see Christ's transformation in my life, just full send, just total commitment, and just let him, truly work his way in me. And so I thought, let's go through the fruit of the Spirit and see what the Bible has to say about all those topics, which then led into, I think we said somewhere in the neighborhood of 750 instances across the entire Bible of the word love, which I plan to go through all of them. But, currently, that's just way too many for me to get through in a single sitting. So we're going to have to do this piecemeal. I'm going to get through as many as I can and then just keep working my way through. Because remember, there's 60 results in 55 verses, and that's just Genesis through Deuteronomy. That's just the Pentateuch. So there is a whole lot more Bible to go through. In the Old Testament alone, I know it was over 400 instances. It was like 442, I think, or something. Um, so it's a lot. But it's imperative to really go through and study love, and I want to see, you know, what love is in the Bible, how it's showed to us, and what are the consequences of it, right? Because if we're looking for um, love to be a fruit of the spirit, right? That's us showing that love is going to show that we are in Christ, that we are filled with the Spirit. Then we need to know what that healthy love looks like. And I think Genesis is a really great what they call in literary devices a foil of God's steadfast love. And this is important. It's always steadfast love versus our love, which is fickle, favoritism, and failing. Not to alliterate the F's, but it's true. And I think that that's really what we see in Genesis here. But to get back to the story of Joseph, I'm sure everybody knows the story of Joseph. Um, this is just another, consequence of that same verse of, and really it goes back before that even with Abraham, showing love to Isaac more than Ishmael. Not that it says that, we don't ever see that. Um, but even God says, your only son, the one you love, right? So that would imply that Ishmael is not the son that Abraham loves. So that kind of imbalance just has been running rampant all the way through Scripture so far. The entire book of Genesis is about this weird imbalanced family dynamic that just never seems to go away. So we continue reading. But when his brothers, saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. So he has this dream, right, where they're all going to bow down to him, and they end up throwing him in a ditch, and we finally come to 39:21. So Joseph's master took him and put him in the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in prison. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper in the prison. So where we're at in the story now is Joseph is sold into slavery. He goes, he works for Potiphar. His wife accuses him of essaying her, if you know what I mean. And so he's thrown in prison, right? And so now we're back to this steadfast love, where this unequal love of his family basically put him in prison, but the steadfast love of God sustains him through prison and beyond. Um, and I think that's just really the continuous, which when you think about it, steadfast, continuous. It's kind of funny how that always plays out, but that's really just the constant theme through Genesis. And so finally, we jump to our last reference, Genesis 44:20. And so this is now, Joseph has been carried through. He's been sustained by the Lord. He is now basically second in command of Egypt. The brothers are here. He has this whole complicated story where they steal from him, and he basically he fakes. What's the word I'm looking for? What's the word I'm looking for? Um, Not impersonates. He sets them up basically. He sets them up that they stole from him when they didn't. Um, and so he asked them, "Have you a father or a brother?" And we said to my Lord, "We have a father, an old man, and a younger brother, the child of his old age. His brother is dead, and he alone is left of his mother's children, and his father loves him." So, this is the last case of love in Genesis, and I just still think it's really important to note that um, Jacob has not learned his lesson. It's actually kind of funny. Um, when you think about it, uh, he had sons, right? And well, I guess he wouldn't have known if they're still hiding it, but you figure somebody at some point had to kind of put together that, all right, why is the favorite one dead? And the others, they probably had some guilty looks to him. I don't know. I'm speculating at this point, but you would think that at some point, you know, in real life, you would stop and you would realize, like, I think my unloved children did something really terrible to my one loved child. But he doesn't. It's just blind on his part, I guess. But he never learns his lesson, and he still has a favorite, and it's Benjamin. And they just have kind of casually accepted it now, where they all know that Jacob loves Benjamin more than them. This is the one he loves, which is just sad. Um, I'm not a father, but I think that's a pretty hard pill to swallow. Um, but anyway, uh, we are probably about. Oops, I didn't mean to close that, but we're probably about halfway through this entire list. I'm not sure how many we covered, but we covered a good bit. That's all of Genesis. That's every instance of love. So far in Genesis, we have several more books to go through, um, but the numbers will start to decrease as we go through. So we will see less. Um, we'll see less verses of God showing steadfast love, and a lot more verses about God commanding love and showing, love the Lord your God, because we'll be getting into Exodus where God is a deliverer. And so I don't know if it's important, but I think, we talked about all the words of love that are included in Genesis. Um, and I just want to touch on one thing that was not included in Genesis, that was missing, right? At no point did we read about a love for God. I have to double check that. I will double check and fact check. But that just hit me right now. I don't think we had any marks of the love for God from man in the entire book of Genesis. That doesn't start until Exodus and beyond. So I don't know what to make of that, but the entire first book is only about God's steadfast love and our love for each other, which fails. But we're going to see as we get into Exodus how often we use love for God and how often that also fails. Um, so that's everything. And I thank you for taking the time to watch us. And I hope it has blessed you.